Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Woo! I hope everybody's having a great and wonderful day because I am manning three cameras, which means I'm going to need an assistant shortly because, yeah, I'm manning three cameras this morning. One from my computer, my webcam camera. So if you are on YouTube, you should be able to see me. I'm actually streaming live on YouTube. Someone can go over there and check for me and see if it works. There you are. Good morning, Lady Judy. I need to put on my eyeglasses today so I can see all the way over here by my computer. And I'm also filming by my own video and Periscope. So I'm manning three cameras today. So if it looks like my eyeballs are everywhere, it's because they are. There's a camera above me. There's the webcam over here. Hi, webcam people. And then there's Periscope. All right. So I'm going to try not to look like I'm in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest this morning. I'm going to try not to do that. Um, but yeah. So I am in my actual office slash studio, and I'm trying this out for the rest of the week, and I'm going to see how I like it. If I don't like it, I'm probably going to go back upstairs to my kitchen counter space where there's also good lighting. But all of the lighting seems to be pretty decent. YouTube looks like it's a little grainy. It might be not be grainy on your side. All right. So I have my eyeglasses on so I can read across the room at my computer. And so yeah, this library back there, that's a teensy part of it. Um, it always is funny to me when people tell me that I need to do my research. I just laugh to myself and I'm like, but I am a researcher. So what are you talking about? So good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Lady Barbara says she likes the YouTube version because you can see more. Yeah, you can see a lot more of my library office space on YouTube because of the way my webcam is set up. All right, so good morning to everyone who is new. Send them a picture of your library. I might do that. I might send them a picture with me posing in my library. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that you've been having a great and wonderful day. We are actually on the last principle in Love Like That, and the principle is self-giving. Self-giving. Now, we have actually gone through four other principles that I hope have been helping your love life with your family, your love life with your friends, um, your love life with anybody, really. So he's been teaching us about being mindful with others, being approachable with others, what that looks like, being graceful with others, what that looks like, being bold, telling the truth boldly, and now we're on self-giving. Jesus said it this way: whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. He says here, I've got to be honest. I've been putting off this chapter. I debated even telling you. After all, you never know it. The book has 5 chapters, and they're all here between 2 covers, regardless. But I think you deserve to know. I've been putting off writing this chapter for months. The rest of the book has been done. It's been written and it's been reviewed. My publisher gave the other chapters the green light. My editor carefully reviewed them, but not this one. This one has been waiting. And if you are in the field of publishing, you know what that's like. You know what it's like for you to get stuck in a chapter. You know what it's like for you to go back and erase half of your chapter and write more parts in, or you don't like a part, and so you don't think it's complete yet. So he says, why? There are two reasons. First, I knew it meant facing my own selfishness head on. And who wants that? I'm pretty content ignoring my self serving ways. In fact, like most people, I'm a master at denying them. I like the idea that it's other people who need to be less selfish, not me. I knew this chapter would mean I'd have to evacuate my selfishness and own it. In an article titled, I'm Okay, You're Selfish, New York Times Magazine reported only 17% of people say they are selfish themselves, but 60% think that most other people are selfish most of the time. Denial, anyone? Secondly, I struggled to make sense of this whole idea. Of all the ideas Jesus had about loving others, this idea of self giving has been the toughest one for me to understand. Don't get me wrong, I knew from the start it had to be included in the book. It's a hallmark of how Jesus taught us to love, and I understand the concept and what it means. But I've struggled to understand how you can really do it. How can you possibly surrender your self focus? More importantly, why would you want to? Why would any rational human being want to ignore self interest and give up pursuing the things they desire the most? Why would anyone give up their own needs, their own drives, their own rights and goals? Isn't that the best way to be happy and fulfilled? Both of these reasons for putting off this chapter fell apart when I discovered a surprising line of research that reveals just how incredibly rewarding and fulfilling it is to own your own self serving ways and start living an unselfish life. Turns out I've had it all backwards. You don't sacrifice fulfillment by giving up on your life, you find it. It's exactly what Jesus said. When you lose your life in love, you actually find it. Consider psychologist Bernard Rimland. He earned his PhD at Pennsylvania State University and his career was on a fast track. But 3 years later, in 1956, he hit a bump in the road. His son Mark was born and diagnosed with what was then a little known disorder called autism. Autism. In fact, at the time, Rimland, like most, had never heard of the term. That began a quest for Rimland to understand autism. He devoted much of his career to it, writing one of the first books on the topic, and in 1967, he established the Autism Research Institute. But along the way, Rimland did a simple experiment that shed some light on one of the great paradoxical truths of the ages. To find your life, you must lose it. He asked 216 students to list the initials of 10 people they knew best, yielding a grand list of some 2,000 people. He then asked them to indicate whether each person seemed happy or not. Finally, he asked them to go over each name again, indicating if the person seemed selfish or unselfish. In other words, were they mostly interested in their own desires, or were they willing to be inconvenienced by others and their desires? The striking result: 70% of those judged unselfish seemed happy, while 95% of those judged selfish seemed unhappy. Rimland was surprised by the paradox. Selfish people are, by definition, those whose activities are supposed to be devoted to bringing themselves happiness. Yet, at least as judged by others, these selfish people are far less likely to be happy than those whose efforts are devoted to making others happy. This finding begins to get at that saying that Jesus repeated more than any other: whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. It flips our intuitive sense of self interest inside out. And it also gets at why Jesus was radical about learning to give ourselves to others. So let's take a look at the self giving of Jesus. Like everyone else, I can remember precisely where I was on the morning of September 11, 2001. Anybody on here can remember where they were when the World Trade Center fiasco occurred? I can remember. I was in a classroom. I was teaching at the time. I was going into my second year of teaching, and we got a call for us to actually come down to the like our main room, which is kind of like our auditorium setting. I was teaching in a private school at the time, a very small school, and all of the students in my school were special needs students. They were either ADD, ADHD, or dyslexic. Now, if you think you have a problem as a teacher in a classroom, I want to give you a whole school of ADD, ADHD children and see how you do. So we're all down. We're all down in the big room, and back then we still had those rollout televisions, with the VCR and all of that. And so we didn't have cable normally claims, and we were like, oh my God, like what's happened, what's going on? And while they were filming that, that's when we all saw the second plane go into the next building. And so that was not only was it traumatizing for the adults, but it was the building. So events like that tend to mark us, right? They tend to mark us in very unchangeable ways. So he says, I remember where I was when I learned of the terror attack on the World Trade Center in New York. I was sitting on the edge of a bed in the hotel room in Oklahoma City. My wife, Leslie, and I were preparing to speak in a convocation at the only historically Black college in the state, Langston University. The news of the attack on the television that morning, of course, changed everything. I'll never forget it. Chances are, if you're old enough, you won't either. Some experiences are so jolting, unexpected, remarkable, and surprising that they become seared into our memory banks forever. Memory specialists call them hot spots or flashbulb moments. The surprise of something we didn't expect or something so incredibly meaningful like proposing marriage. That's another one I won't ever forget. Why won't I ever forget it? Because when my husband proposed, I fainted. Yeah, another story, another time. It releases a chemical in our brain called glutamate. It improves our mental processing in the moment and focuses our attention in powerful ways, making the memory clear, vivid, detailed, and enduring. Flashbulb memories include richer sensory details than others. The neurochemical in our brain cements the memory in place, as it were, making it impossible to forget. So, those things that you can't seem to shake in your mind, they're actually cemented by a chemical process. All right? Think about that. Not only do flashbulb memories become something we can easily recall, they shape the way we behave moving forward. In fact, experts consider recollections as mental time travel, not just about the past, but also a version of the future. A growing body of research at Harvard University suggests that the purpose of memory is far more extensive than simply helping us store and recall information about what's already happened. For example, researchers have shown how memory helps us draw a mental sketch of someone's personality and imagine how that person might behave in a future social situation. In other words, recollecting a past event gives us a clearer imagination of how we will behave in the future. The things we remember change who we are and who we are becoming. Our habits, ideas, and hopes, even our promptings to love, are influenced by what we remember. Jesus didn't need modern research to leverage this fact. On the last evening of his life, he was deliberate in creating an indelible memory that shaped the future of humankind. He hosts a final meal with his disciples in Jerusalem. It's held on the second floor of a building near the Pool of Siloam, around a long rectangular table just 18 inches tall. Pillows surround the table where the disciples and Jesus can lounge in the traditional fashion. Once in the room and around the low table, Jesus does something unprecedented and carefully calibrated. He ensured that it would be a flashbulb memory burned into the mind of each disciple and passed along to future generations who would follow. This was no accident. Jesus planned his actions, it was premeditated. He wanted this meal to be remembered and celebrated. Jesus, in fact, said it straight out that this evening, do this in remembrance of me. He wanted a payoff for leaving their lives and following him. Uh-oh. One second. There we go. Before the meal of bread and wine and Jesus' accompanying message of profound symbolism, he humbles himself in a way that shocks his disciples. He does something so incongruent to what they were expecting and so deeply meaningful that it was guaranteed to stick in their memory forever. Their teacher, their Lord, takes a towel and basin and begins carefully washing each man's feet with water. Now you have to understand, he's washing off dirt and grime and animal poo and all of the stuff that has probably accumulated on their feet through travel. Mhm. The disciples are stunned. They are dismayed. They are overwhelmed. This task was normally reserved for the lowly servants. But here is their venerated rabbi kneeling before each of them, one after the other, to lovingly rinse the road dust from their feet. It is an inversion. It's upside down and it doesn't make any sense. Power and recognition are on the minds of the disciples, yet Jesus is demonstrating service and sacrifice while their minds are on power and recognition. Sounds like 2019. He knows each of them well. The boisterous James and John, whom he calls sons of thunder, Simon the zealot, whose passion for politics could be easily provoked, the skeptical Thomas, who struggled with his doubts, the upbeat Andrew, rash-tongued Peter, and all the rest. Jesus even washes the feet of Judas, whom he knows is about to betray him. Jesus looks at each of these men in the eyes, considers their personalities, and displays uncompromising humility. He doesn't pay someone to wash their feet. Jesus does it himself. He becomes a lowly, unpretentious, self-giving servant. It's easy to miss the profundity of this act because of the gulf in time and culture between us and that fateful evening. A modern day equivalent might be your pastor coming to your home to wash your dirty clothes or clean your bathrooms. Or maybe the governor of your state stopping by to sweep out your garage or separate your garbage. The analogies lack the personal and intimate experience of what Jesus did, but they get at the startling act of humility and service. The self-giving act of their rabbi surely endeared the disciples to him more than ever. Of course, what Jesus did was more than an act of affection. It's a life lesson. Jesus tells the disciples they must follow his example with each other. They must become like servants, setting aside concern and position and privilege. They must place others above themselves. Through foot washing, Jesus unforgettably shows that service, not status, is what he is about. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Even before that last night, Jesus spoke to his followers about his radical servant attitude. When they originally joined Jesus and his movement 3 years ago, they were focused only on reaping the rewards. They wanted a payoff for leaving their lives and following him. They quarreled over who would get what role. 2 of them even had their mother make a special request to Jesus on their behalf, ensuring that they would be promoted. A constant power grab entwined the 12. Jesus told them repeatedly that power gains were fundamentally alien to the life inside of God's kingdom. It's not about being first or being more prominent. It's about heartfelt service. It's about love. But even up to the time of their final dinner together, they were jockeying for position and squabbling over who was greatest. So Jesus leaves them and us with an indelible act that spoke in ways that words could not. He leaves us on the last night of his life with an unforgettable act of humble service that sums up perhaps more than anything else he did, short of the cross, what it means to love like Jesus. So I'm going to leave you with this definition. And then next week, we're going to talk about what keeps us from being self giving. Self giving is selfishness in reverse. It is not concerned with benefits and it expects nothing in return. Whether it is offering directions to someone who appears lost, giving an especially generous tip to a server who seems needy, or encouraging a friend who didn't get an expected promotion. Self giving love is done out of care, compassion, and kindness, expecting neither repayment nor appreciation. It comes down to motive. You can be a giver and still expect something in return. We call it giving with strings attached. In other words, there's an expectation connected to the giving. The origin of the idiom, no strings attached, is directly tied to an 18th century fabric merchant who would mark the flaws in woven cloth by tying small strips to the bottom of the boats at the location where the flaws were present. When the tailor or dressmaker needed flawless cloth, he or she would ask the merchant to provide fabric with no strings attached. The custom persists today, and so does the practice of giving with an expectation that we'll be getting something in return. True self-giving involves no this for that, no quid pro quo. True self-giving is offering the best of who you are to others with no strings attached. So next week, we're going to look at what keeps us from being self-giving. What keeps us from being self-giving? All right. As promised, I told you we were going to get back into vindicating the vixens. Vindicating the vixens. And this is revisiting sexualized, vilified, and marginalized women in the Bible. Lately, there has been lots of conversation around women, womanhood, expectations for us, right? There's been some conversation around equality of women. There's been some conversation around the treatment of women, especially in spiritual settings. We've had some conversations around Stockholm Syndrome, right? Where Stockholm Syndrome is where you become accustomed to the person who is mistreating you or abusing you, or you become accustomed to your captor in captivity. And so rather than resist what is happening to you, you actually go along with your captivity and your captor. You start parroting your captor's reasons for why you are in the state or the place that you're in. So we see some Stockholm Syndrome in some of these spiritual houses of worship, and it's not a very good look at all. So we completed our talk about Tamar on last week, about why her story needed to be redeemed. I even put up, I think on my personal page, I even put up a Bible book that was supposedly giving a short preview or short narrative of Judah's life. And I noticed that the Bible book completely left out Tamar. It didn't even mention Tamar. It didn't mention he had married her. It didn't mention that he had sons by her, nothing. So I'm considering writing this particular company and asking them to correct that. Because if you're doing a summary on a major Bible character like Judah, you would think that you would include that in your summary, but she's not included. So today we're going to start off by we're going to begin talking about Rahab. Rahab. What we talk about when we talk about Rahab. You can put some hearts on the screen if you're already familiar with Rahab's story. Rahab plays an a very important part in the life of the children of Israel because she allows two of the children of Israel to go in and spy out the land. That gives them the intel, the information they need in order to be successful in defeating the town that she lived in. And when people came to look, when the authorities came to look for these men who were still present, descriptively, she told a lie. She hid them. She didn't give away their location. Now, some people would say, well, God must approve of lying. No, this is a part of the Bible that's called descriptive. They're telling you what happened in all of its unholy state. They didn't mince words. They didn't scratch out that part of the story. They didn't try to paint Rahab as better than she was. They simply told you what she did. Doesn't mean God approved of it. So don't go around lying now and saying that, well, if Rahab did it, then surely it must be okay. No. No. The story is simply telling you what she did in order to hide the spies. It does not approve it. It just tells you what she did. So, the writer here, Eva Bleeker, says, Rahab had me worried when I started studying her 10 years ago because I was worried about myself. A female theology student at a conservative seminary that I love and revere. I had matriculated with specific ideas about women's roles in ministry, their limitations, and their value in church. Truly, I had given no thought to the potential that my sense of self would grow or shift or freak out during my student days. When it did all of those things, I felt disoriented by my own anger and fear. Mixed messages flashed around my campus like heat, lighting before a toad strangling thunderstorm. Consider the complexity of these statements. Scripture bars women from preaching, so they shouldn't be taught to preach. Well, maybe Scripture makes provision for women to preach to other women, and heavens, some of them can really do it. So maybe they could learn to preach as long as no male students learned from them or could hear them learning the skill. Or maybe it's okay for women to preach in church as long as they are under the authority of a male senior pastor and some elders who are men. You'd be surprised how many circles actually believe that. I've had people tell me that if they see me teaching or they see me preaching, they immediately go to who is your overseer or who are you under, all right, based on their interpretation of Scripture. So, or maybe when a woman talks about the Bible, it's just sharing. She doesn't have to call it teaching, and she doesn't have to call it preaching, because some people would lose their minds. So she will just call it sharing and preach the house down anyway. Maybe she could limit herself to a devotional or a testimony rather than a sermon, or rather than calling it a sermon. What about teaching? Is that different? No, forget all that because it misses the point. Women are only born to have babies. The implication of these conversations wrenched my heart, but I was too scared to participate in them or contribute anything that could be taken seriously. The vitriol that sometimes accompanied these discourses made it much, much worse. I felt like I had been prepped for surgery, but improperly anesthetized, and I awakened on the operating table. I know what that feels like. To hear 5 doctors arguing about how to cut me open. I could hear but couldn't move, much less say, hey, you're talking about me right here. I'm right here, people. Years after my graduation, I found a handwritten note in the back pocket of a binder. It was to me from me. During a class session, a beloved professor had encouraged us to write down something that we were wrestling with. So I wrote, I hope that God values and loves women in the same way that he values and loves men. That's crazy. Wow. That was a Selah moment. Because if he doesn't, I don't know what I'll do. The debates about women in the church prompted my pain and turmoil, but their source was much deeper. During the season when I wrote that note, I felt both drawn and driven by desperation to study women in the Bible. And ladies, if you have not done this, please do this. Do it for yourself. Study women in the Bible. Don't wait for somebody to give you the assignment. Study women in the Bible. Study their roles. Study the single women. Study the women in leadership. Study the intercessing women. Study the business women. Study the married women. Study the vixens. Study them all. In my independent research, I got curious about the women identified in the Matthean genealogy: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. I had read that their inclusion was based on a commonality, namely sexual deviancy. These women were given bad girl status. How Mary fit into this was never explained, but as I studied and prayed and stumbled along, a different pattern began to emerge. And a professional sex worker from the ancient Near East became my hero. I grew in respect for Rahab, but she made me nervous as well. First, Rahab shows up in a section of the Old Testament narrative that can be difficult to navigate, especially for those who hold to a literal, historical interpretation of the story. Secondly, our main character is a prostitute. Wasn't she called an innkeeper back in the flannel graph days? And a story about a prostitute will likely include prostitution. Thirdly, in our time and place, the book of Joshua offends and confuses. It stretches, perhaps painfully, our understanding of God's nature and intent, especially if we insist that the characters are real. My tradition esteems the Bible and grants it authority. So, what does it mean when one person's interpretation points up and another's interpretation points down? Yet we're all standing alone on the Word of God. Are we reading the same text? How do we disagree with people we love? What happens to our faith when we reject an idea we would have energetically defended only 10 years ago? My study of Rahab prompted these questions. Her life story could not answer everything, but it really helped. So, locating Rahab. Rahab enters the story of Israel at an extraordinary moment. These Israelites have never been in Israel. They have followed a pillar of smoke and fire through the desert for 40 years. They have buried an entire generation. They have experienced miracles and violence and divine victories. With Joshua in command, the whole group has camped east of the Jordan River. And when the time comes, Joshua sends two men into Canaan to spy out the land with instructions to focus on Jericho, Rahab's hometown. We could call Rahab the paragon of otherness. She embodies the opposite of all the traditional values held by the Old Testament's original readers. She is the other. She is the opposite. She is female. She is a Canaanite, which is Israel's mortal enemy, by the way. She is a prostitute. She is not known as a virtuous woman. And she is a resident of Jericho, the very first city doomed to fall by the sword when the Israelites enter the land. She's like a death row inmate waiting for the needle. The spies, on the other hand, are on a personal mission from the most powerful and revered Israelite alive. God has installed Joshua, made promises to him, and anointed him to replace Moses. So we would expect the spies to be valiant, to be righteous representatives of both Joshua and God. The writer of Joshua, though, skews the expectations that the reader has. Everything on the surface is true, but it's incomplete. Surprise one, flashback. You know how a TV show will give you a little flashback as a new episode begins, previously on, right? As chapter 2 of Joshua begins, the text notes that the two spies are sent out from Shittim. If you haven't read Numbers lately, the mention of this place might not produce an internal groan or sinking feeling in you, but the original reader would have thought, did you really have to bring that up? Things are just starting to go well, and now I'm reading this. So let's refresh. After annihilating the two formidable kings, Sihon and Og, events that Rahab will mention as justifications for her city fearing an Israelite army, they nearly scuttled their future in the promised land. The author of Numbers notes that while staying in Shittim, the Israelite men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women. All right? So this is in Numbers 25, verse 1. So this is where they're coming from, and they're getting sent to Jericho. These Moabites have invited them to participate in sacrifices and feasting in honor of pagan gods. The flagrant insults to God's honor and rebellion against his commands should make God's people quake, but it doesn't. God's anger burns against them with such force that he nearly puts an end to them in his zeal. So when Shittim gets mentioned, just as the action begins in the book of Joshua, we might find the urge to cover our faces and whisper, I can't look. The author starts by mentioning this place, and before that single verse is complete, the spies are in Rahab's house. So these particular Israelites have gone from a place of sexual immorality that got the children of Israel punished by God, and now they're leaving the place of sexual immorality and they're being sent to Jericho. And the first place they wind up is in the house of a prostitute. So if you understand that history, you're probably thinking, are they going to commit a sexual act again? This is not going to go well if they do. Do you sense the irony? The spies set out from the camp and end up at a prostitute's house in one sentence with no mention of completing the task that Joshua had assigned to them. The text does not say that these men did any spying or acquired valuable information. It does say that they were detected by the enemy. So, I want you to think about how you have always heard this story. Because in the context in which I have always heard this story, I have always heard it as the spies went to her house because they knew that they could get information out of her. But that's not what the text actually indicates. The text actually indicates that they were probably up to no good yet again. And this time they were detected by the enemy. Not only do the spies sent on a task for God's people go to the prostitute's house, but the storyteller used double entendre or entendre to emphasize the shadiness of their actions. A contemporary example might help us appreciate the details of the language. At the 2000 hit movie Remember the Titans, fictionalizes the racial integration of a Southern high school football team. The team starts winning games and the team members gain status in their school. While walking up a staircase between classes, several girls swoon over the quarterback, who is known by his nickname, Sunshine. Another team member overhears their admiration. He tries to turn the girls away from his teammates, saying, Sunshine is from California. They say they know that already, but the teammate emphatically repeats the same. Sunshine is from California. He means that because of Sunshine's sexual preferences, he will not return the girl's affections. But that's not what he says. His meaning is concealed inside his simple statement of fact. Joshua chapter 2 is rife with this kind of doublespeak, a perfectly PG meaning on the surface, with sexual innuendo and humor close to that same surface. In his excellent work, The Faith of the Outsider, Frank Anthony Spina enumerates the author's word choices in this passage that have a double meaning. First, the spies lodge in Rahab's house. The word lodge can be used in a sexual or non-sexual context in Hebrew, something like the difference between sleeping with a teddy bear and sleeping with the boss. Second, when the king's men arrive, the writer uses the verb for enter. Where are the men that entered here? And the preposition unto. Again, a double meaning is in play, but more blatantly than before. Additionally, Rahab's name functions like the word broad in English as a slang term for a potentially loose woman. The text does not explicitly charge the spies with the same sexual immorality their comrade committed, but the writer seems to want the reader to accept the potential. Keep in mind that the story has the opportunity for the wordplay because the spies, rather than demonstrating their stealth and skill, get caught. Without Rahab's quick thinking, they are toast. Before moving on, the reader must consider a troubling question. Did the Israelite spies feel they had sexual license with the women of Jericho because these women were about to die anyway? Certainly, the spies knew about the divine injunction against all inhabitants of the land as it was decreed and recorded prior to their mission. Deuteronomy 20, for example, spells it out. In the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. This command to leave no one alive falls between the mess at Shittim and the invasion of Jericho. The spies know that Rahab, a person who is under this ban, will be slaughtered in combat within days. Perhaps knowing this encouraged the spies' recklessness and informed the author's choices when writing about them. Rahab's certainty of imminent death clearly conditions her own boldness. So maybe they realize that, hey, since this city is going to be destroyed anyway, let's go in there and have our last hurrah. And once they get there, they get caught for quote unquote spying. Surprise, Rahab's faith and confession. So you might have gone there to get your last hurrah with the prostitute, but the prostitute winds up preaching to you and giving you a word about your God. At this point, Rahab shines as a hero who has outsmarted every other character. She has successfully hidden the spies who are detected by the king's men, and she has successfully sent the king's men on a fool's errand. In the next scene, she shines in another way. The language ends when Rahab joins the spies where she has concealed them on the roof. Before they go to sleep, she has some things to say. What Rahab articulates next should astonish us, beginning with her declaration, I know the Lord is handing this land over to you. Now we got to ask ourselves, why does Rahab know more about their purpose than they do? Rahab believes that she and her people will be dispossessed. She knows that God intends to give her homeland over to the Israelites, and her people wait for it to happen in fear. As proof that their fears are justified, she starts listing God's mighty acts to them. His mighty acts already performed to bring the Israelites to her border. He made passage for them to escape Egypt right through the Red Sea, and he gave them total victory over the powerful kings, leaving them utterly destroyed. She knows that little Jericho is a puny opponent compared to those now dead, well-armed Amorite kings. So she and all her neighbors wait for the Israelites' attack in deliberating panic. They are melting with fear. As if this weren't enough of a surprise, Rahab forms a sentence that must have disoriented the spies even further. The Lord your God, she says, is God in heaven above and on earth below. They went to a prostitute space and basically got a sermon. Just let that marinate. The prostitute, the one introduced to the reader with a jocular tone and lewd language, has just confessed belief in Yahweh. Imagine the expressions on the spies' faces as Rahab articulates Orthodox Israelite theology to men who wind up in her space. Whether or not they came to her home for sex, her declaration must have shocked them. Then Rahab strikes a deal to save herself and her family. The story about the 40 years of desert wandering is bookended by several parallel events and images. At the front end, recorded in the book of Exodus, the people left Egypt through parted waters, the Red Sea. At the back end, as recorded in the book of Joshua, they entered the promised land through parted waters at the Jordan River. The bookends also include miraculous events, the 10 plagues on the front end, the fall of Jericho on the back end. Perhaps the mirrored symbolism reflected in Exodus and Joshua can inform an understanding of the crimson cord in Rahab's window. The deal agreed upon by Rahab and the spies depends on a sign to ensure her safety. Rahab must hang a red cord in the window, the cord through which she helped the spies to escape. If it is not visible at the time of attack, the Israelite army will be free to kill her and everyone else inside. But if the streak of red is at the opening to Rahab's home, it will ensure that those gathered inside would be safe, not unlike the lamb's blood on the doorpost of the Israelites' home on the night of the first Passover. The symbol of safety comes with similar conditions in both instances. In Rahab's case, the deal applies only to those gathered within her house. Anyone who goes outside forfeits his or her life, just like the instructions given before the plague on the firstborn. As Jericho literally falls, the two spies themselves rescue Rahab and her family, fulfilling their commitment to her, our lives for your lives. So what happened? Rahab's family was indeed rescued, and for a time, they lived outside the camp. As unclean Canaanites, they inhabited the fringes of the community, literally and socially. But the writer of the book of Joshua describes Rahab living among the Israelites even to this day. If only we knew the details of that story. The outsider had become an insider. Some traditions suggest that Rahab married one of the spies. And we know from Matthew's gospel that she had at least one terrific child, a man you could read about in the Ruth chapter of this book. So next week we'll talk about what would we lose if we lost Rahab. What will we lose if we lost Rahab? So I want you to think about, what have you always heard about the story of Rahab, and Does the context change any? The fact that these men that were sent were leaving one place where God had already judged the Israelites for sexual immorality, and they were supposed to be spying out Jericho, but they wind up in the prostitute's house. And the prostitute winds up preaching to them about who their God is and their God's mighty acts and exploits, and strikes a deal to save her life and her family's life. So if you want to comment today about either of these topics, we've got about 10 minutes. I want to make sure that we end at an hour today. Hit the double smiles and we will bring you in for some conversation. Lady Latoya, Lady Barbara, Pastor Ben, Lady Judy, Prophet Jonathan. Tomorrow we will be opening up the conversation box for public, so it'll be a lot more conversation hopefully going on. Uh-oh. All right. Lady Barbara, it kicked you off. Prophet Jonathan, hopefully it will add you in shortly. Hello to those on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this broadcast. Prophet Jonathan, it is still spooling, so hopefully it will be able to add you in. Oh man. I'm not sure why it's not connecting. But I see you spooling. All right, let's see if we can get Lady Barbara in. Hello.
Good afternoon. I've been having a problem all day with Periscope. I don't know why when we get the good topic, I tell you, the fight is on. It's like the heat is on.
Well, guess what? Guess what? One second. You are now live. You are now live also with Prophet Jonathan.
Prophet Jonathan.
Both
God
of
bless you, Prophet.
God bless.
I read that story, but I never read it like that. But I saw it as God using her in a situation to preserve. He preserved her life and her family because she was able at that time to and ask for help concerning not being destroyed. But when you often think about the higher point of it is that she was a prostitute. But I always looked at it this way, that God can take any situation, any individual, and turn it and work it for his good. So we say that sometimes, but we always misjudge or take things out of context. But I thank God that during the time that we study and we get challenged, we're able to look deeper and to see how God moves in mysterious ways and work in different situations. And that's what I was getting out of. So it took me back to like how God had told Peter that after you deny me 3 times, the rooster was going to be the confirmation for him. And then when you look back, you see how God caused iron to swim and had to use an angel to let the donkey speak to the prophet who couldn't see. So I was just, so you just look back through and you begin to get a better understanding of the scripture. So I just said thank you for this teaching and this time and the books that you bring forth. So it's building my library as well. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Awesome. Praise God. Prophet Jonathan.
Definitely. I can concur
excited about that.
Can you speak up just a little bit, because I have two other cameras going, so I want to make sure I pick up your comment.
Oh, awesome. I said this is one of my newfound collections that I really enjoy now. Collecting books and such. So I do appreciate your the books that you're bringing in these seasons. I don't know what I want to say first. I guess talking about the vixen, I've heard that story preached from men and women,
Mm-hmm.
and they both preach it the same.
Yep.
The men were coming to the city to spy the land. Rahab, the harlot, sees them and tries to save her life.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "I'll keep you from being detected if you save my family," basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't know why, but I've always kind of felt disconnected when they taught the story, and I never really understood why.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe that was my internal spirit, like, okay, something's not right with how they're teaching this. So I always felt disconnected. I didn't know it's being judgmental or like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't want to hear about a harlot or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I see now, like, okay, something wasn't quite right with that. And I mean, I think it's quintessential for men to teach things in a way that makes the man look righteous and the woman looks rebellious, or make her look at art. So that way we can keep this male supremacy, this male chauvinistic, or this male bias, the man is more righteous. I've heard,
Mm-hmm.
definitely the weaker vessel.
The woman is the devil. The woman is the temptress. All of that.
Yeah.
So my thing, anytime I've ever heard somebody minister it, always in the back of my mind would say, so we're not going to talk about them going directly to the prostitute's house? So we're not going to talk about that? We're not going to talk about how they had no business there to begin with? And when I saw the connection between where they had been as a people, because it says in the scripture text, it says they were sent from Shittim, which is actually spelled Shittim, but it's pronounced Shittim. They went directly from that place to here. You have to ask yourself the question, why were they sent there? And then why did they wind up back in another prostitute's house when God had just judged the entire nation for sexual immorality? Like, if I saw people getting burnt up by God, destroyed by God over sexual immorality, the last place I would think to actually go would be to another prostitute's house in another city. It's almost like
God's grace covers me more because of my title and my position. So God judged people without the title, but I have my my armor bearer with me. God's not gonna disgrace me. God's not gonna judge me. He's gonna uphold me. He's gonna show me a greater grace now.
Listen, it's almost like judgment went right over their head and they were willing to go again and take a chance. And the fascinating thing about this is that it happens so often. The fascinating thing for me is the fact that I know I myself has been in some of those situations where I went to a place that I thought I was going to go engage in something seedy, and God wound up meeting me in the most unlikely place. And I think that's when I read it, that's kind of what I see with Rahab. Like they're expecting that they're going to engage in something possibly with her or with the women that might have been there, right? But instead, they get a word from the Lord as a reminder of who they are, who God is, and what they're actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, kind of like Jonah, he got on the boat.
Yeah. So it's almost like a redirection back to what their focus was supposed to be. In other words, I know you came to Jericho for a one-night stand, but you're about to get this sermon today.
You got to get a revival.
Yeah. You went to the prostitute's house, but you about to go to church and you just don't know it yet. You're about to get a sermon. You're about to get a sermon in the place where you thought you was going to get sexually satisfied. But instead of getting sexually satisfied, you get spiritually rebuked. Because she basically reminded them of their purpose. She basically reminded them of what they were actually supposed to be in the city to do in the first place. And in doing that, she is able to secure, oh, wow. My whole Periscope shut off. Woo! All right, we gotta crank it back up. Let me see if I can get my episode thing here going. Part 2. All right. All right, that just shut off mid-sentence there. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. My Periscope just completely shut down. Sorry about that, Prophet. Let me see if I can invite you. Okay. All right. Prophet, you'll have to hit the double smile again so that we can finish. So what I was saying is basically she redirected them back to the topic at hand. She actually redirected them back to the reason why they were supposed to show up in the first place. And many of us have had incidences like that in our life. Many of us have had opportunities to do wrong, and God brings someone in who helps us and reminds us of our purpose. They may be the least likely person. Lady Barbara said, okay, all right. So I want you to think about that today. I want you to think about the other thing that we opened up with, which is talking about our selfless giving. And I also want you to think about where in your life is God sending people who will remind you of your purpose. What has been those times, or where have been those times where you were trying to get one thing done, and sometimes it may have been out of the will of God, and God sent somebody along to speak to you and bring you back into focus, bring you back into purpose. Prophet Jonathan is trying to get back on, and right now it is not allowing, so I am not sure what is going on. But I've got 2 other streams, and now Periscope wants to act up today. I tell you, if it's not one thing, it's another with technology. But we hang in there, we keep going. Sorry about that, Prophet Jonathan. I'm not sure why it's not letting me back in, but we will be back tomorrow, and comment section will be on public. So I'm going to need my moderators in tomorrow to just make sure you block those that are coming in and putting crazy stuff on the screen. So tomorrow we'll be back with Thinking Thursday, and we will be talking about letters to the church, and we'll also be talking pagan Christianity, and we're going to continue learning about Constantine. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Good morning, Lady Judy, Lady Cynthia. Glad to see you with us this morning. Prophet Johnson said he has been anointed to block. Well, we're going to need you to pour your oil tomorrow, brother. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. If you are in one of the areas that's being affected by these weather and these storms and these cyclones, we're praying for you. We're praying for your safety. We're praying that you follow instructions as they come out from your emergency weather services, that you're not out and about unnecessarily, and that you have the supplies that you need if you have to hunker down. If you're in a place where there's beautiful weather, thank God for it, appreciate it, enjoy it, get outside, get some of that fresh air and sunshine. All right? Take care and God bless. Ladies, take care and God bless.